We begin this story in a somewhat grim way, as we see a group of men with bloodied hands disposing of many garbage bags filled with dangerous materials. The next morning, we see the body of a young man amidst the trash. Trucks have covered him with parts of this material, and the smell of decomposing flesh has begun to attract crows, who are happily devouring everything that once had life. One of these crows lands on the boy's face, clearly intending to peck at the juiciest part of his body, his eyes. But at the last moment, the boy wakes up and grabs the bird before it blinds him. Now awake and feeling disoriented, the young man stumbles over the mountain of trash for a few seconds. In an attempt to gather his thoughts, he decides to smoke a cigarette, but is shocked to find that no matter how much he inhales, no smoke comes out of his mouth. Instead, the cigarette smoke is escaping through several bullet-like holes in his body, an eerie image that causes him to drop the cigarette, which falls onto his foot, burning his skin. However, to his surprise, the young man feels no pain from the burn. Nervous, he tries to pick up the cigarette, but instead, he grabs a shard of glass from the ground to see his reflection. The image immediately disturbs him, as he looks exactly like a corpse. His skin, lips, and entire face appear lifeless, as if he were a zombie. Worse yet, no matter how hard he tries to scream for help or comfort, his vocal cords don't move, and no sound comes from his mouth. Instead, all he can produce are strange growls that would scare anyone who might approach. Not knowing what to do, the boy begins to believe that he isn't fully dead, and that the solution to crossing over to the other side is to unalive himself. So, he walks straight to a cliff and throws himself into the void. Upon falling, the sound of his bones breaking is more than clear. However, after a few seconds, he stands up as if nothing had happened, convinced that he's cursed, and that this may be punishment for something he did in a past life. The young man spends the following days holed up in a cave, where he only watches his watch intently, trying to recall something important from his life. The next morning, as he wanders through the forest, he encounters a rabbit. Suddenly, his body starts walking toward the animal, and a tremendous hunger compels him to chase the poor creature. Minutes later, he faints and loses consciousness. When he wakes up, not only has he caught the rabbit, but he's devoured it down to the bones. Not knowing what happened, wild thoughts start circulating in his mind. The first thing he thinks is that an apocalypse occurred, and now everyone is a zombie like him. Because of this, he decides to go to a nearby town to find out. That same night, under the cover of darkness, he approaches the town, where he finds a cotton sweater and puts it on. However, the sweater's owner immediately appears. It turns out the young woman had left her phone in the garment and, using GPS, managed to track it down. She didn't expect to find a boy wearing it. The girl's name is Sang Yi, and her first thought upon seeing the protagonist is that he is homeless and took her sweater out of necessity. She only asks him to return the phone that's in the pocket. As Sang Yi approaches to retrieve her phone, the young man smells a delicious aroma coming from the girl and tries to bite her head. Fortunately, he still retains some humanity and stops himself from doing it. Afraid that Sang Yi will discover him, he turns his back on her, hiding his face. She gives him some money and leaves before the situation gets more frightening. When dawn arrives, the young man tries to eat something other than raw animal meat. He attempts to reach a nest on a tree branch, but quickly realizes he doesn't have the strength to even throw a rock. In fact, his body is practically useless, and he has lost all the agility and skill he had during his lifetime. Now that he's a zombie, he can't do anything and faints once more. When he wakes up, his body has done the work again, and he's devouring a wild animal. He immediately realizes he can't continue like this and must figure out who he is and why he died. With this in mind, he explores several nearby places until he arrives at an abandoned meeting area. There, he finds a working treadmill that might help him improve his walking ability. After several attempts and a few hard falls, he manages to take a few consecutive steps and keep up with the treadmill, proving that he can learn with dedication. Later, he practices breaking wooden rods with his mouth as a way to strengthen his jaw and eventually speak again. Days pass, during which he practices walking and his diction until he improves enough to pass as a living person and avoid drawing attention. One night, while taking a break, though I don't know why since zombies don't get tired, the smell of human flesh reaches his cave. After stepping outside to investigate, he discovers a man who had brought some flowers for his deceased sister. As the man pays his respects at his sister's grave, he hears the protagonist breaking branches as he approaches. In response, the man throws a piece of meat in his direction. The young man accepts it with excitement and begins biting into the raw meat. Suddenly, another man appears and strikes the visitor in the back with a rock, killing him with one blow. Our zombie watches in bewilderment as the attacker lifts the man's body and carries it to the edge of the cliff, throwing it into the void. Curious to see if the man is still alive, the protagonist descends to the bottom of the cliff, where he finds the man in his final moments. The man begs for a key and murmurs some words that we'll likely learn more about later. Among his belongings, the zombie finds his wallet and identification. The man's name was Moyan, and he was a private investigator. Later, using the man's credentials, he goes to his apartment, where he decides to stay for a few days. Although the place is a mess, the fridge is full of food, something that excites the young man, who stuffs himself with everything he can. Unfortunately, his intestines don't work. Remember, he's dead, so he soon ends up vomiting everything. The next morning, the hunger is almost uncontrollable, but since he can't go out in public, his best option is to earn some money online. He takes a job folding pizza boxes, which turns out to be exhausting and poorly paid. After several hours of folding boxes, Moyan's phone rings. A client wants to recover their lost pet and offers to pay for the detective's services. With the promise of good money, he decides to steal Moyan's identity and pose as a private investigator. He buys several beauty products to help him conceal his pale skin. Now that he has a new image and some decent clothes, he agrees to meet the client. To his surprise, it turns out to be a 6-year-old boy who has lost his dog. Moreover, the boy is the nephew of Sang Yi, the young woman he met the other night. When Yun, the boy, pays him with a coin, Moyan gets furious and demands more, angry that he came such a long way for so little. The argument with the boy and his friends escalates to the point where it draws the attention of Sang Ji, who happens to be passing by. Before she can intervene, Moyan, who recognizes her from the other night, decides to flee with the little boy's money, sparking a chase. It ends when Sang Yi makes an extraordinary throw, hitting Moyan with a motorcycle helmet she borrowed. Since Moyan is a zombie, it's clear that his head is his weak point, as movies have taught us. This causes him to faint, leading Sang Yi to believe he's dead because she can't hear his heart beating. A few minutes later, they both find themselves in an ambulance, where paramedics are trying to revive Moyan, but all their equipment indicates that the young man is dead and there's no hope for him. Suddenly, Moyan wakes up, scaring everyone present. Relieved that she hadn't killed him, Sang Yi forces him to lie down and rest. Moyan knows that if he gets to the hospital and they run tests on him, he'll never get out, so he waits for the right moment when Sang Yi leaves him alone to escape. Upon leaving the hospital, he encounters Hodu, Yun's missing dog. For a moment, it seems like he wants to eat it, but the dog's cute face stops him. In the distance, the voice of a woman shouting some kind of promotion can be heard. When he approaches, he hears that there are free samples of tripe soup, his favorite food since he was a child. Eagerly, he approaches to get a free sample. However, just as several people gather around, the hostess announces that the samples are gone and that anyone who wants to try the famous soup must pay at her restaurant. Without money, Moyan can't afford the soup, so he leaves, disappointed. As soon as he turns to go, some young people dressed as zombies ask him if he came to participate in the show. In response, Moyan says no, but then he hears that the dancers will get a free dinner after the show, so he returns and offers to participate. He impresses everyone with his incredible dancing skills, attracting new customers to the restaurant. However, when the hostess distributes the free food, Moyan is nowhere to be found. Suddenly, a desperate scream is heard from the kitchen. When everyone rushes in to see, they find Moyan eating raw tripe from a bowl on the floor. One of the hostess's friends shows up to subdue Moyan, who is frightening all the customers with his animal-like behavior. However, Moyan defends himself, demonstrating great combat skills. He flees into the forest, wondering where he got these fighting abilities and how he was able to subdue the man so effortlessly. A few days later, his motor skills are at their peak. He no longer trips and has incredible agility. The only thing that sets him apart from the living is his diet and the fact that he looks dead and is forced to wear makeup. The only clue he has to his past life is the combat skills he now seems to remember clearly. For this reason, he goes to Yun, who practices martial arts, to ask if they recognize the moves. Yun takes him to his karate class, where the children try to guess the technique, but even the teacher has no idea what he's doing, so he ends up mocking him for making up the moves. That night, Feeling defeated, as he walks the city streets, he sees a report about a girl who was murdered by a man dressed as Santa Claus. Just as the girl's picture appears on the screen, Moyan seems to get lost in the young woman's eyes and approaches the screen, striking the glass hard. Something tells us he wants to know her. When he returns home, an old woman appears at his door, asking for money. It turns out she's the owner of the apartment and threatens to kick him out if he doesn't pay soon. At this point, he remembers that Sang Yi owes him money from an agreement they made when she assaulted him, so he goes looking for her. However, just as he finds her, he discovers that the young woman is being kidnapped by some mysterious men who are part of a religious cult. He quickly follows them, and somehow, we don't know how, he appears in front of the men's car and stops them, rescuing Sang Yi, who is completely drunk and likely won't remember anything she saw during her rescue. Since he won't be able to get money from Sang Yi in this state, he decides to return home. While in the shower, Moyan begins to have flashbacks of what happened and how someone shot him to death. The next morning, as he thinks about ways to make money, he senses the scent of Sang Yi approaching. Suddenly, the young woman appears at his door, furious. It turns out that Moyan left her with the bill for his medical expenses, which amounts to $100,000. However, Sang Yi explains that she doesn't have that kind of money. In fact, she's in a worse financial situation than he is. The only way she could pay him back is by working for him. In response, Moyan hurriedly tries to push her out of his house, but at that moment, the doorbell rings. An old client appears, deciding to hire Moyan to find her daughter, Bei, who has been missing for a month, and the authorities haven't been able to locate her. After offering a large sum of money, Sang Yi steps in and starts asking very insightful questions. It is then revealed that she is a journalist, which gives her a great ability to interview people and gather information. So Moyan agrees to team up with her. Following the clues that Sang Yi gathered from the missing girl's mother, they arrive at a rehabilitation center. Moyan joins the program with the promise that Sang Yi will assist him from outside. During his admission interview, the center's staff discovers that Moyan is trying to smuggle in some raw meat, which makes them realize how much the boy needs help. As a result, they immediately allow him to join the program. During the day, the center is perfect, and the no-meat diet is strictly enforced. However, at night, things are quite different. Large ceremonies are held where the cult leader, Lee, drugs the patients and manipulates them to steal their money, making them believe he has magical powers. Upon discovering this, Sang Yi gets excited about the story and calls an old friend, Detective Cha, to help her get into the rehabilitation center. However, without a warrant, they are denied entry, but this doesn't discourage her. She waits for the cover of night to sneak into the place. Upon entering the meeting center, she finds a young woman tied to a chair. As best as she can, she helps her escape. However, on their way out, they run into the cult leader, Lee, whom Sang Yi tries to confront, planning to accuse him of the horrific acts he commits in secret. Before she can approach him, the site manager traps her. Fortunately, Moyan appears and helps her break free from the man. Being an evil man, Lee takes the opportunity to sneak up on Sang Yi from behind and attempts to stab her with his cane. However, Moyan steps in front of her and ends up being impaled instead. Furious, the protagonist turns toward Lee, who can't believe the boy is still standing. Moyan then grabs Lee by the neck, planning to kill him, but Sang Yi convinces him to turn him over to the authorities. After rescuing all the patients and putting an extremely wicked man behind bars, they both return home, where Sang Yi celebrates with her family, while Moyan takes a bath and eats raw chicken to celebrate. Things get complicated when Sang Yi shows up at Moyan's apartment and catches him in a bathrobe, through which she can see the holes in his body. Panicking, she runs away immediately. Back home, the young woman becomes obsessed with the idea of zombies. So she starts researching thoroughly, discovering that they are real and that there have been cases in recent years. Her friend Tai, who is a fan of these topics, explains several things that make sense when she remembers that Moyan has no heartbeat and survived being impaled. Afraid of working with the undead, she decides to visit Moyan to collect her share of the money and stay away from him as soon as possible. However, while they talk, the young woman experiences intense abdominal pain and collapses. Later, she wakes up in the hospital and finds out that Moyan didn't devour her. Instead, he took her to get medical help, which makes her realize that even though he's a zombie, he's a good one. Now that she knows the truth, Moyan confesses that he doesn't remember his past, Consequently, the young woman offers to help him on his mission to uncover what happened to him and who is responsible. While going through Moyan's belongings, they discover a strange engraving on his lighter. They take a photo and upload it to the internet, hoping someone will recognize the symbol. Barely 5 minutes pass before they receive an anonymous message from someone who knows about the symbol and asks to meet at a nearby plaza. But when the two arrive at the location, a message from the same person cancels the meeting. Before leaving empty-handed, Sang Yi runs into Cheol, a witness she interviewed in a murder case some time ago. He tells her that life has been tough since then, and his mother, who suffers from dementia, has gotten lost in the mountains. Sang Yi seizes the opportunity and gives him her detective service card, offering to work for free until his mother is found. This idea doesn't sit well with Moyan, who reluctantly agrees. Several hours of searching later, Sang Yi is exhausted and suggests they return to the city and try again the next day. However, Moyan's heightened sense of smell picks up something, and he begins tracking it, focusing more on the forest. After much effort, they finally find the old woman sitting under a tree. Overjoyed, Sang Yi approaches her, but suddenly a huge boar appears, threatening to attack if she comes any closer. The snorting of the animal is so terrifying that Sang Yi tries to hide with the elderly woman, while Moyan engages in combat with the boar in a style reminiscent of Street Fighter. As the women hear the noises of the fight, it becomes clear that the boar is much stronger than Moyan. In a humorous scene, we see him flying through the air as his life bar drops. A few seconds later, convinced he won't win the fight using brute force, Moyan stands next to a cliff and yells at the wild animal to charge him, tricking it into falling into the void. But at the last moment, his jacket gets caught on the boar's tusk, and as a result, he ends up falling too. Terrified, Sang Yi starts screaming for her partner, who appears moments later with his prize, a whole boar for himself. Back in the city, Cheol lovingly reunites with his mother, and though she doesn't seem to remember who he is, she leaves with her son, who doesn't stop thanking Moyan for his help. With some money earned, Sang Yi takes Moyan to a shaman who might tell him something about his past. Though Moyan thinks it's a scam, the shaman starts a strange dance. After receiving some money from Sang Yi, he says a few interesting things about Moyan, sparking his curiosity. The sound of the bells triggers a flashback for the protagonist, where he sees the little girl who was murdered holding a doll, with the day taking place near Christmas. With this clue, they head to the girl's parents' house, but unfortunately, they aren't home. With no other leads, Sang Yi mentions the doll from Moan's flashback to Detective Cha, who responds with a similar photo found in the parents' house. It's clear Moyan has a connection to the little girl, and this is their best lead so far. Later, when Moyan returns home, he is shocked to find everything turned upside down. Someone has broken in and trashed the place. After checking his belongings, he realizes the only thing missing is his lighter. Elsewhere, we see Cole using the lighter, implying he was the one who sent the message to meet at the plaza and then staged a casual encounter. Moan recognizes a familiar scent in the apartment and immediately goes looking for Cheol, who accuses him of being the kidnapper and murderer of the girl in the news. With this revelation, Moyan becomes convinced that becoming a zombie was divine punishment for committing such a horrible crime. In the next scene, we see him holding a drill to his head, intending to unalive himself. However, just as the drill nears his head, it suddenly shuts off. When he checks what happened, he finds the wires are exposed and ends up electrocuting himself in a funny way. Not far away, Sang Yi has found the father of the little girl, Zoe, who was murdered by a man dressed as Santa Claus. At the father's place, Sang Yi sees many pictures of the young girl, and in one of them, she notices a man's arm standing next to the girl, wearing the same watch she saw broken among Moyan's belongings. The girl's father informs her that the watch belonged to his daughter's personal bodyguard, who also disappeared the night of the murder. Excited by having uncovered Moyan's past, Sang Yi goes to find him to share what she's discovered, but she can't locate him anywhere. On the floor of his apartment, she finds a photo of Cheol and texts Moyan, letting him know she'll meet him soon. Moyan, who had been hiding in the forest, blaming himself for the girl's death, rushes to help when he reads her message. At Cheol's house, he and his wife are very nervous about Sang Yi's visit. She has brought a USB containing footage from security cameras near the place where the girl supposedly disappeared. The more Sang Yi talks about finding the culprit, the more anxious Cheol becomes, slowly reaching for a hammer hidden behind him. Sang Yi notices this and throws hot tea in his face, hiding in the next room. There, she finds Cheol's mother and his wife, who begs her to call the police to arrest Cheol for murder. The wife pretends to take her phone, but when Sang Yi lets her guard down, she receives a blow to the head from Cheol's wife. Now tied up and gagged, Cheol confesses that he and his wife were always the killers, and if Sang Yi hadn't been so nosy, she wouldn't be about to suffer the same fate as the little girl. Cheol steps out momentarily to prepare for disposing of the body, leaving his wife to watch Sang Yi, who luckily manages to free herself. Surprising Cheol's wife, she sprays her face with mouse repellent, buying enough time to flee into the street, where she meets Moyan, who helps her hide from Cheol's wife, who is in pursuit. Sang Yi then tells Moyin that he had nothing to do with the girl's death. In fact, he was always her protector, and from the start, Cheol manipulated him into believing otherwise. Fortunately, the police arrive minutes later and arrest Cheol's wife, while Cheol waits around the corner with his mother. Furious over losing his wife, Cheol blames Moyan for everything and threatens to kill Sang Yi in revenge. Moyan, however, says that this is between the two of them and suggests they meet to settle everything once and for all. Cheol agrees and sends a remote location for them to meet. Upon arrival, Moyan finds Cheol's empty van. Suddenly, his phone rings, and on the call, his enemy tells him there's a gift for him in the back seat, something that will explain everything about his past. But when Moyan opens the car door, it explodes, and from a distance, Cheol celebrates thinking he's finally killed Moyan with such a simple trick. But being a zombie, Moan rises unharmed. This time, however, he has regained all his memories, so we finally learn what really happened with little Zoe. We flash back to the day of the event, where we see Zoe with Moyan eating ice cream. Moments later, the girl is kidnapped, and all Moan finds is the lighter in the snow. Following the truck tracks, he arrives at Cheol's house, where Zoe is tied to a chair. Rushing to free her, Moan is struck from behind, and Cheol takes him to a dump, where he shoots him to death. Now, with all his memories restored, the only thing Moyan can think of is killing the man responsible for all this misery. Cheol, hiding in a nearby cabin with his mother, panics when he sees Moon still alive and tries to flee, but the protagonist catches him and delivers a brutal beating. Throughout the beating, Cheol laughs, as if enjoying the pain. Moyan asks why he killed little Zoe, and Cheol reveals that it was all Moyan's fault. Initially, he wanted to give the girl as a gift to his wife, who couldn't have children, but because Moyan got involved, he had no choice but to get rid of both of them. While listening to Cheol's ramblings, Moyan becomes distracted, giving Cheol just enough time to pull out a gun and shoot him in the chest. Once again, Moyan gets back up, so Cheol, completely terrified, empties his gun into him, but nothing brings him down. He then decides to aim for Moyan's head, who remains frozen for a moment, but just as he pulls the trigger, his mother steps in front of the bullet, taking the shot instead. Before she dies, the old woman calls him Min Zhao, saying she loves him and that she will always be his mother. Suddenly, a flood of memories returns to Moyan, showing him that the old woman woke up every morning. It turns out she is his mother, and Cheol had been keeping her drugged and captive to ensure she remembered nothing about her previous life. Cheol's sick mission was to build a family by stealing other people's loved ones. This twisted idea fuels Moyan, or Min Zhao, his real name, to attack Cheol, determined to devour him. A few days later, we find ourselves at Min Zhao's mother's funeral. Though he survived many gunshots, the greatest pain he feels is not having remembered his mother in time to save her. After the funeral, Sang Yi asks Min Zhao if he really ate Cheol, but he remains silent. The next morning, he leaves his apartment, abandoning the borrowed identity of Moyan to find out who he truly is. Later, Sang Ji receives a call from Cha, asking if she's recovering well from the blow to the head, to which she responds by asking if Cheol's body had any signs of being bitten by an animal. Cha finds the question strange, but then reveals that they only found a bullet in his body and that he died from blood loss. This news relieves Sang Yi, who now knows her boss did not succumb to the zombie urges. As Min Zhao distances himself from everything, it's clear that he misses Sang Yi, and the idea of being away from her weighs heavily on him. He left all his money in the apartment for her and now has no way to buy food to quell his hunger. That night, his hunger becomes so intense that his eyes turn red, and he begins searching through dumpsters for something to eat before losing control. However, he ends up fainting. When he wakes up the next morning, he's back in his apartment, and there are chicken bones everywhere. Nervous and thinking he hurt someone, he starts checking the area, discovering deep scratches on the door. Suddenly, Sang Yi appears, and the protagonist is overjoyed. After talking for a while, he confesses his struggles to control his hunger, and she offers to help him him. They buy a large amount of raw chicken and try to strengthen Min Zhao's resistance by keeping the food near him but not letting him eat until it's time. Next comes the true test. Min Zhao will have to go 3 days without eating. The purpose is to see, with newly installed cameras, how he behaves when he loses control. Midway through the experiment, Min Zhao is on the verge of losing control, and Sang Yi has fallen asleep outside the apartment. When she wakes up, the zombie has eaten all the chicken and can now smell human flesh nearby, causing her to panic. Min Zhao, in zombie mode, approaches her, eager to taste her flesh, pinning her to the ground. A second before biting her neck, Sang Yi hits him in the head with a pan, knocking him out. When Min Zhao wakes up, he doesn't remember anything that happened during his zombie state. Sang Yi advises him to stay. He can't roam the world without controlling his appetite, as he might attack an innocent person. After investigating Moan's background, they discover that all of his family members are dead, so Min Zhao can take on his identity without being questioned. But before assuming the identity of a good man, Min Zhao vows to find Moan's killer and bring him to justice, a murderer who is just being released from prison. His name is Pung, and he was arrested for selling expired medicine, a minor charge that only landed him a few months in prison. The first thing Pung does is call Moyan's office, where Min Zhao answers, pretending to be Moyan. With this, Pung confirms that he failed that night, and that Moyan is still alive, meaning he must finish the job. Just hours later, Pung is set up with his henchmen in the building across the street, where they begin surveillance. Meanwhile, Min Zhao and Sang Yi follow the last expenses Moyan made before his death, leading them to a veterinary clinic that is now closed. Inside, they see a photo of Pung, who turns out to be a corrupt veterinarian trafficking medicine. All of this unfolds while Pung's henchmen are watching and sending photos of their actions to him, waiting for the right moment to strike. That night, they set a trap at Min Zhao's door, hoping to catch him. When he touches the doorknob, he receives a massive electric shock that causes a blackout across the city. At that moment, they run to capture him, but are shocked to see him unharmed, sitting in his chair with a new hairstyle from the electric tension. Having failed, Pung decides to confront the situation head-on and sends a dozen men to attack Min Zhao during the night. Fortunately, Min Zhao hasn't forgotten his karate moves, so he emerges victorious from the battle. During the fight, one of Pung's men stabs Min Zhao in the heart with a wooden stake, but he is unfazed and continues fighting. The man calls him a demon, prompting Min Zhao to flee before more men arrive. The next day, Pung's henchmen return the money he paid them, claiming they want nothing to do with the demon he is trying to kill, fearing for their lives. Zung, the man who stabbed Min Zhao, shows the stake to Pun and informs him that even driving it in deeply didn't stop the demon. Given his profession, Pung decides to use the blood on the stake for tests and discovers that injecting it into animals turns them into zombies. The veterinarian reassures Zung that they have nothing to fear, as he will soon find a way to kill Min Zhao and resume their business without delays. Just then, there's a knock on the door, and while Pung attends to it, Zung and his friend stay behind. They begin hearing strange growls coming from the lab. Curious, they follow the sound to an underground lab, where they find a zombie in a cage. Pung watches them patiently, analysing their reactions. Meanwhile, back at Min Zhao's apartment, there's a knock at the door. When he opens it, he sees Pung in a hazmat suit holding a strange green vial. Upon opening it, Min Zhao passes out. When he awakens, he's strapped to a table in Pung's lab, where the veterinarian has drawn several blood samples for his experiments. This is when we get a flashback of Pung's past. He was happily married until his wife died from a mysterious illness, driving him to an obsession with bringing her back to life. He invented the zombie formula and has since tried to create a new version that suppresses the primitive urges of zombies, restoring them to a more human state. Moyan had been investigating Pung and had gathered a lot of evidence of his crazy experiments with animals and radioactive waste, the same waste that Min Zhao was exposed to when he resurrected. Sang Yi, who feared Min Zhao might lose control and attack humans, placed a tracker in his phone. After checking it, she realizes he's at Pung's business, so she rushes to find him. Using stealth, she infiltrates the veterinarian's clinic, searching high and low for any sign of Min Zhao. She eventually finds herself face to face with Pung's wife, asleep on a stretcher. After freeing Zung and his friend, she finds Min Zhao strapped to a table. Unfortunately, the boys make too much noise, waking Pung's wife, who attacks them. In an instant, Min Zhao gets up and manages to calm the woman, communicating with her in zombie language through growls. Just then, Pung appears with a shotgun and orders his wife to attack the intruders. She pounces on Zung and starts devouring him, while Min Zhao seizes the distraction to tackle Pung and try to wrestle the gun from him, causing it to fire and hit the zombie wife in the head, killing her. As Pung cradles her, giving her a final moment of solace, the authorities arrive and arrest the doctor. Zung and his friend are rushed to the hospital. However, as the officers drive Pung to the station, the car crashes and we see that Pung has taken taken the formula and turned into a zombie. The next day, the group learns what happened with the officers and realizes it's only a matter of time before Pung comes after them. His first move will likely be to retrieve his wife's body, so they decide to get ahead of him. They sneak into the morgue and steal her body, planning to use it as bait against Pung, who suddenly appears during the plan and kidnaps Sang Yi, intending to make an exchange. Shortly after, Min Zhao arrives with Pung's wife's body. However, the veterinarian isn't satisfied with the trade and decides to kill them in revenge, sparking a huge fight. Min Zhao realizes he doesn't have the strength to defeat Pung unless he fully embraces his zombie power. Cha, who had been hiding and waiting for the right moment, surprises Pung from behind, threatening to shoot him if he doesn't release Sang Yi. But the zombie is immune to body shots, so he knocks Cha out with a single blow. Immediately, Sang Yi makes her move, kicking the gun toward Min Zhao, who picks it up and points it directly at Pung's head. Pung laughs, accusing Min Zhao of being too cowardly to pull the trigger. At that moment, Zung and his friend appear with the green chemical pun used earlier to knock out Min Zhao. They manage to sedate Pung just enough to throw him off balance and make him fall to the ground. Thinking they've won, Zung celebrates, only to be pulled down and subdued by Pung a second later, who threatens to kill him. Suddenly, Min Zhao yells at Pung to let him go. He laughs again, but this time, the protagonist has made his decision and blows Pung's head off. In that moment, Min Zhao realizes he's just killed his only hope of becoming human again. Oh, what? Now, he's left to live as a zombie until the day he either perishes or unalives himself. A year has passed, and Sang Yi has no idea what happened to Min Zhao, who disappeared shortly after the incident with Pung. One night, she receives an invitation to a costume party, which she attends excitedly, knowing she'll see Min Zhao there. He arrives, dressed in a white suit, looking great in his zombie costume. As they catch up on everything that's happened, a terrifying scream cuts through the party. They discover someone has been murdered on the dance floor. Sang Yi, with a knack for these situations, tells Min Zhao it's time for the detective duo to solve the case in a new adventure. And this is how this amazing show ends. Please subscribe and like the video, your support means a lot.